Hello everyone, welcome back to Buried Files. Tonight we bring you 7 deeply disturbing true highway patrol horror stories that will make you question what really happens on America's loneliest stretches of asphalt when the sun goes down and civilization fades into the rearview mirror. These are not fictional tales, but documented incidents from law enforcement officers who patrol the highways where anything can happen and frequently does. Each account has been compiled from official reports, officer testimonies, and verifiable evidence that cannot be explained away or dismissed. The open road holds dangers that most drivers will never encounter, and perhaps that is fortunate. If you value authentic horror content drawn from real case files that will keep you awake at night, subscribe to Buried Files and hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest investigations into the darkness that exists between the white lines. After you listen to these chilling accounts, we want to hear from you in the comments below about your own encounters on isolated highways. Now settle in as we explore 7 cases that prove the most terrifying things on the road are not always what you can see coming. Nathan had been investigating accident scenes and conducting highway patrol operations for 7 years when he received the call that would fundamentally alter his understanding of what was possible in this world. He was a man who believed in evidence, in cause and effect, in the rational explanations that could be found for every phenomenon if you simply looked hard enough. His background in forensic science had made him valuable to the department, and he was frequently called to assist with complicated accident reconstruction and unusual death investigations. But nothing in his training, nothing in his experience, and nothing in the scientific literature he had studied could prepare him for what he would find on Highway 77 on that February night. The call came in at 2:34 a.m. from multiple motorists reporting a vehicle fire on the southbound lanes, approximately 15 miles north of the Texas border. The initial reports were confusing and contradictory. Some callers described seeing flames engulfing a car on the shoulder. Others reported seeing a person on fire walking away from a vehicle. One particularly distraught caller insisted that she had seen a man burning while standing upright in the middle of the highway, not running or rolling on the ground, but simply walking as if he were taking a casual stroll. Dispatch classified it as a priority emergency, and Nathan was the closest unit to the location. He arrived on scene within 11 minutes of the initial call, his patrol car cutting through the darkness with lights flashing and siren wailing. As he approached the reported location, Nathan expected to see the typical aftermath of a vehicle fire. Charred metal, melted plastic, burned rubber, smoke still rising from the wreckage, and possibly an injured or deceased motorist who had failed to escape the burning vehicle in time. What he found instead defied every expectation and violated every principle of fire dynamics he had ever learned. The vehicle was still there, a late-model sedan pulled onto the shoulder with the driver's door standing open. The engine was running, the headlights were on, and there was absolutely no sign of fire damage. Nathan approached cautiously, his hand resting on his service weapon as his mind raced to make sense of the scene. The car appeared completely intact. The paint was not blistered or discolored. The tires were fully inflated. The windows were not cracked from heat exposure. He looked inside the vehicle and found a purse on the passenger seat, a half-empty coffee cup in the holder, and a phone charging in the center console. Everything suggested that the driver had simply stopped the vehicle and stepped out for some reason, perhaps to check a tire or to stretch their legs during a long drive. But then Nathan saw the footprints. They began at the driver's side door and led across the gravel shoulder toward the desert scrubland that bordered the highway. These were not ordinary footprints. The gravel and dirt showed clear impressions of shoe soles, but each print was surrounded by a dark discoloration. Nathan knelt down and touched the ground near one of the prints with his gloved hand. The soil was still warm, not just warm, but hot enough that he could feel the heat through the latex. He illuminated the area with his flashlight and followed the trail of prints as they led away from the highway. 30 yards from the vehicle, Nathan found the body. The victim was lying face down in the dirt, arms and legs positioned as if the person had been walking forward and had simply fallen to the ground mid-stride. But the condition of the remains made Nathan take an involuntary step backward, his training barely preventing him from losing his composure entirely. The body was burned beyond recognition, carbonized to the point where the skin had split and contracted, exposing muscle tissue and bone underneath. The clothing had been almost entirely consumed by fire, leaving only fragments of synthetic material that had melted into the flesh. The smell was overwhelming, a combination of burned meat and chemicals that made Nathan's eyes water. What made the scene impossible was the lack of fire damage to anything else. The ground immediately surrounding the body showed no signs of burning. The vegetation, dry desert grasses and small shrubs that would have ignited instantly if exposed to sufficient heat, were completely untouched. There was no accelerant residue visible on the soil. There was no evidence of any external ignition source. The body had burned with incredible intensity, hot enough to char bone and melt metal fillings in the teeth. Yet nothing else in the immediate vicinity showed any heat damage whatsoever. Nathan called for backup. The medical examiner, the fire marshal, and the crime scene investigation unit. While he waited for them to arrive, he secured the perimeter and began documenting the scene with photographs and measurements. He examined the vehicle more thoroughly and found the victim's wallet in the glove compartment. The driver's license identified him as Nathan Simmons, a 42-year-old accountant from Nashville with no criminal record and no history of mental illness or substance abuse, according to the preliminary database check. There was nothing in the vehicle to suggest foul play, no signs of struggle, no weapons, no drugs or alcohol. The other units began arriving, and with them came more confusion. The fire marshal walked the scene twice, taking temperature readings and collecting samples, before admitting that he had no explanation for what he was seeing. The burn pattern was inconsistent with any known type of fire. The intensity of the heat required to produce that level of tissue destruction would have ignited everything within a significant radius. Yet the physical evidence showed that the fire had been confined almost entirely to the victim's body, with minimal spread to the surrounding environment. The medical examiner's preliminary assessment at the scene was even more disturbing. The internal organs showed signs of extreme heat damage that was inconsistent with external burning. The heart and lungs appeared to have been cooked from the inside, with tissue damage that suggested exposure to temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Yet the external burning, while severe, did not penetrate as deeply as would be expected if the fire had started on the outside and worked its way in. It was as if the victim had somehow ignited internally, with the fire burning outward through the body rather than inward from an external source. Investigators canvassed the area for witnesses and reviewed footage from traffic cameras along that stretch of highway. What they found in the witness statements was consistent but impossible to reconcile with known science. Multiple motorists described seeing the victim walking along the shoulder of the highway, while completely engulfed in flames. They described the flames as being bright orange and white, indicating extreme heat and extending several feet above the victim's head. But what made their accounts so disturbing was the victim's behavior. Every witness stated that the man was not running, not screaming, not attempting to extinguish the flames. He was walking calmly, purposefully, as if the fire consuming his body was of no concern to him whatsoever. One witness, a truck driver with 30 years of experience on the highways, provided the most detailed account. He stated that he had been approximately 200 yards behind the sedan when he saw the brake lights illuminate and the vehicle pull onto the shoulder. He watched as the driver's door opened and a figure stepped out. The figure stood beside the vehicle for approximately 10 seconds and then suddenly burst into flames. The truck driver described it as instantaneous, like watching someone flip a light switch. One moment the person was standing normally, the next moment they were completely engulfed. The burning figure then began walking away from the vehicle, moving at a steady pace across the shoulder and into the desert. The truck driver pulled over and called 911, but by the time he had stopped his vehicle and grabbed his fire extinguisher, the burning figure had collapsed and the flames had extinguished themselves. The autopsy results only deepened the mystery. The medical examiner confirmed that the victim had died from thermal injuries, but the pattern of burning was unlike anything in the forensic literature. The internal organs showed damage consistent with exposure to extreme heat, but there was no evidence of smoke inhalation in the lungs, which should have been present if the victim had been breathing while the fire burned. The toxicology screen came back negative for accelerants, drugs, alcohol, and any other substances that might explain spontaneous combustion or increased flammability. The victim's stomach contents indicated that he had eaten a normal meal several hours before death, nothing unusual or concerning. Investigators found no accelerants on the victim's clothing or skin. No traces of gasoline, kerosene, lighter fluid, or any other flammable liquid. The chemical analysis of the residue collected from the body showed only the expected byproducts of burning human tissue and synthetic fabric. There was no evidence of an external ignition source. No matches or lighters were found on the body or in the vehicle. The car's cigarette lighter was not activated, and there were no electrical malfunctions that could have produced a spark. The investigation expanded to include the victim's background and recent activities. Nathan Simmons had no history of mental illness, no criminal record, and no known enemies. He had been driving home to Nashville after attending a business conference in Dallas. His employer, his family, and his friends all described him as stable, responsible, and ordinary in every way. There was nothing in his life that suggested he would be involved in anything unusual, let alone become the victim of an unexplained burning death on a remote highway. Nathan, the investigating officer, became obsessed with finding an explanation. He spent weeks researching similar cases in the archives, reaching out to experts in fire science, forensic pathology, and even contacting researchers who had studied alleged cases of spontaneous human combustion. What he found was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. There were documented cases going back centuries of people who had burned to death under mysterious circumstances, often with minimal damage to their surroundings. But the scientific community had never accepted spontaneous human combustion as a real phenomenon, instead attributing such cases to external ignition sources that had simply not been identified. However, Nathan found 3 other cases in the department's archives that matched the pattern of the Nathan Simmons case almost exactly. In each instance, a motorist had stopped their vehicle on a remote stretch of highway, exited the car, and been found burned to death a short distance away, with no clear ignition source and minimal environmental damage. The cases had occurred over a span of 15 years, all on different highways in different states, and all had remained unsolved. The victims had nothing obvious in common. Different ages, different occupations, different backgrounds. The only commonality was the manner of death and the complete absence of any rational explanation. Nathan compiled all the evidence into a comprehensive case file. But despite his efforts, the case of Nathan Simmons was officially classified as death by unknown causes. The investigation remained open, but with no suspects, no motive, and no clear mechanism for how the death had occurred. There was nowhere else to go with it. The file was placed in storage along with the 3 similar cases that had preceded it. 17 years have passed since that night, and Nathan still keeps the case file on his desk. He has continued to research similar incidents and has identified 23 cases worldwide that match the same basic pattern. People who burn to death under impossible circumstances, with no ignition source, no accelerants, and minimal environmental damage. The medical literature offers no explanation. The fire science community dismisses the cases as anomalies that simply have not been properly investigated. But Nathan knows what he saw. He knows what the evidence showed. And he knows that somewhere in the space between what science can explain and what actually happens in the world, there are phenomena that defy our understanding. The vehicle belonging to Nathan Simmons was eventually released to his family and sold at auction. The stretch of Highway 77 where he died looks exactly the same as it did that night. Just another mile marker on another lonely road. But Nathan drives past that location regularly. And every time he does, he thinks about the footprints that led away from that car, the body that burned with impossible heat, and the witness who saw a man walking calmly through flames that should have sent him screaming to the ground. Some mysteries are never solved. Some questions have no answers. And sometimes the most terrifying thing is not what happened, but the realization that it could happen again at any time, to anyone, without warning or explanation. Ryan had been with the Nevada State Highway Patrol for 11 years when he encountered something that would shatter his understanding of reality and force him to question everything he thought he knew about the world. He was not the type of officer who believed in ghosts or supernatural phenomena. He was practical, methodical, and relied entirely on evidence and procedure. His record was spotless. He had received 3 commendations for service and was being considered for a promotion to sergeant. Nothing in his training or experience had prepared him for what happened on that frozen January night in 2019. And nothing that came afterward would ever make sense of it. The stretch of Highway 50 that cuts through the Nevada desert has earned the nickname the loneliest road in America, and for good reason. On certain sections, a driver can travel for over 100 miles without seeing another vehicle or any sign of human habitation. The landscape is stark and unforgiving, dominated by sagebrush and rocky outcroppings that seem to stretch endlessly in every direction. During the day, the desert sun beats down mercilessly. At night, temperatures plummet and the darkness becomes absolute, broken only by the occasional set of headlights cutting through the void. It was on one of these isolated stretches, approximately 47 miles east of Fallon, that Ryan's patrol shift took a turn into the impossible. The dashboard clock read 3:47 a.m. when his headlights caught the figure standing on the shoulder of the highway. Ryan had been driving for nearly 3 hours without seeing another vehicle, and the sudden appearance of a person in such a remote location immediately triggered his training. He slowed the patrol car and activated his spotlight, illuminating the figure more clearly. It was a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, wearing what appeared to be a white sundress that was completely inappropriate for the weather. The temperature outside was hovering around 28 degrees, and a bitter wind was blowing across the desert floor. She was waving her arms frantically, clearly in distress. Ryan pulled onto the shoulder and exited his vehicle, immediately noting several disturbing details. The woman was barefoot, her feet cut and bleeding from walking on the rough asphalt. Her dress was soaking wet, clinging to her thin frame, and she was shivering violently. What made no sense was the water itself. There had been no precipitation in this area for over 3 weeks, according to the Weather Service, and there were no bodies of water anywhere nearby. The woman looked directly at Ryan with wide, terrified eyes and began speaking rapidly, her words tumbling over each other in her panic. She told him that her name was Sarah and that she needed help desperately. She said that they were following her and that she could not go back. When Ryan asked who was following her, she simply shook her head and repeated that he could not take her back there, that it was too horrible, that she would rather die in the desert than return. Ryan attempted to calm her down using his standard de-escalation techniques, speaking in a measured tone and assuring her that she was safe now. He retrieved a thermal blanket from his trunk and wrapped it around her shoulders, then guided her to the back seat of the patrol car where the heater was running. As he closed the door and walked back to the driver's seat, Ryan called in his location and situation to dispatch, requesting an ambulance to meet them at the nearest town. The woman continued talking from the back seat, and what she said next made Ryan's blood run cold. She provided specific details about an accident location ahead, describing a sedan that had gone off the road approximately 12 miles further east, near mile marker 114. She described the color of the vehicle, a dark blue, and said that the driver had not survived. She begged Ryan not to take her to that location, becoming increasingly agitated at the thought. Ryan made the decision to continue east to verify her story. If there was indeed an accident ahead, other motorists could be in danger, and someone might need immediate medical attention. He assured the woman that he would not make her get out of the vehicle and that she would remain safe in the patrol car. She seemed to calm slightly at this, though she continued to stare out the window into the darkness with an expression of profound sadness. 12 miles later, at mile marker 114, Ryan's headlights found exactly what she had described. Fresh skid marks led from the highway down a steep embankment into a ravine. A dark blue sedan was overturned at the bottom, its front end crumpled against a large boulder. Ryan immediately called in the accident location and requested emergency services, then carefully made his way down the embankment to check for survivors. The driver was still in the vehicle, held in place by the seatbelt. It was immediately apparent that the victim had died on impact. The steering column had collapsed into the chest cavity, and the angle of the head indicated a broken neck. Ryan took photographs of the scene and retrieved the driver's license from the wallet in the victim's purse. When he looked at the photograph on the license, his hands began to tremble. The face staring back at him from the laminated card was identical to the woman sitting in his patrol car. Same features, same hair color, same distinctive scar above the left eyebrow. The name on the license was Sarah Mitchell, age 23, with an address in Reno. Ryan climbed back up the embankment, his mind racing to find a rational explanation. Perhaps it was her twin sister. Perhaps she had been a passenger in the vehicle and somehow survived the crash. When he reached his patrol car and opened the back door to ask Sarah about the identification, the back seat was empty. The thermal blanket lay folded neatly on the seat, but there was no sign of the woman. Ryan checked around the vehicle, calling out her name, but received no response. The desert stretched out silently in all directions, and there was nowhere she could have gone without him seeing her. He had been within sight of the vehicle the entire time he had been down in the ravine. The doors had remained closed. He had heard nothing. His radio crackled to life as dispatch responded to his accident report. They informed him that a missing person report had been filed 3 days earlier for a Sarah Mitchell, who had failed to arrive at her destination in Ely after leaving Reno. Her vehicle description matched the sedan in the ravine, and she had been traveling alone. Ryan requested that they send the coroner and investigative team. then sat in his patrol car, trying to make sense of what had just happened. That was when he noticed the back seat. Where the woman had been sitting, the upholstery was soaking wet, with puddles of water collected on the floor mat. He reached out and touched the water with his fingertips. It was ice cold. He took photographs of the wet seat and floor, then began reviewing his dashboard camera footage, hoping it would provide some clarity. What he saw on the recording made his stomach drop. The footage clearly showed Ryan pulling over and getting out of his vehicle. It showed him standing on the shoulder, appearing to speak with someone, though no one was visible in the frame. It showed him retrieving the thermal blanket and placing it in the back seat as if draping it around invisible shoulders. It showed him driving for 12 miles while apparently conversing with the empty back seat, his head occasionally turning to the right as if listening to a passenger. The audio captured his voice, asking questions and making reassuring statements. But there were no other voices on the recording. No evidence that anyone else had been present. The coroner arrived 90 minutes later and performed a preliminary examination at the scene. Based on body temperature, lividity, and rigor mortis, the estimated time of death was approximately 4 hours before Ryan had discovered the accident. Sarah Mitchell had died instantly when her vehicle left the road at high speed sometime around midnight. She had been dead for nearly 4 hours when Ryan picked up a hitchhiker who looked exactly like her, who was wearing a white dress just like the one the corpse was wearing, and who had directed him to the precise location of her own body. Ryan sat in his patrol car until sunrise, watching the investigative team process the scene. He said nothing about the hitchhiker to the other officers. He filed his report describing his discovery of the accident scene, but made no mention of how he had known to look for it at that exact location. When he returned to the station at the end of his shift, he requested to review the missing person report that had been filed for Sarah Mitchell. The report had been filed by her sister, who stated that Sarah had been traveling to Ely to visit friends and had last been in contact near Fallon. The last known sighting had been at a gas station approximately 20 miles west of where Ryan had picked up the hitchhiker. Security footage from that gas station, which Ryan requested and reviewed, showed Sarah purchasing bottled water and snacks at 11:23 p.m., then returning to her vehicle. As she pulled out of the parking lot, the camera captured something that made Ryan's blood run cold. In the background of the footage, barely visible in the grainy nighttime recording, a woman in a white dress could be seen standing under a street light at the edge of the parking lot. The figure was watching Sarah's vehicle as it departed. Ryan enhanced the image as much as possible and felt his chest tighten when he realized the figure was Sarah herself, watching her own vehicle drive away moments before the fatal crash that would end her life. The wet footprints in Ryan's patrol car remained for 3 days, despite the heating system running constantly. Crime scene technicians photographed them and collected samples, but could find no logical explanation for why they would not evaporate. On the 4th day, they simply were not there anymore. The water had vanished as mysteriously as the woman herself. Ryan transferred to desk duty 6 weeks later. He never worked another night shift. His request cited personal reasons, and the department approved it without question, likely attributing the change to the trauma of discovering a deceased motorist. Ryan never told his supervisors about what had actually happened that night. He was afraid they would think he had suffered a psychological break, that the isolation and stress of highway patrol had finally gotten to him. But he could not dismiss what had happened. The wet seats had been real. The thermal blanket had been disturbed. The dashboard camera had recorded him speaking to someone, even if that someone had not been visible. And Sarah Mitchell had known exactly where her own body would be found, had led him directly to the scene of her death. Research into the history of Highway 50 revealed a disturbing pattern. Every year on the anniversary of her death, multiple motorists have reported seeing a young woman in a white dress attempting to flag down vehicles near mile marker 102, exactly where Ryan had first encountered Sarah. Security footage from the same gas station shows the figure appearing in the background on January 15th each year, always standing in the same location, always watching the departing vehicles. The gas station attendant refuses to work the night shift on that date and will not explain why when questioned. Sarah Mitchell was laid to rest in a cemetery in Reno. Her death was ruled accidental, the result of overcorrection while attempting to avoid an animal on the roadway. The toxicology report was negative for drugs and alcohol. She had simply lost control of her vehicle in a moment of panic and paid for it with her life. There was no indication that anyone else had been involved. No evidence of foul play. Just a young woman driving alone through the loneliest stretch of highway in America, who died frightened and far from home. Ryan keeps a photograph of the wetback seat in his desk drawer. He has shown it to exactly 3 people in the 6 years since that night. 2 dismissed it as condensation or a spilled drink. The third, an elderly officer who had worked Highway 50 for 30 years before retiring, simply nodded and told Ryan that he was not the first and would not be the last. He said that some people do not realize they are dead, that they keep trying to get help, keep trying to warn others, keep trying to finish the journey they started. He said that Highway 50 has always been that way and always will be. Whether Ryan encountered the ghost of Sarah Mitchell or experienced some kind of shared psychotic episode brought on by isolation and exhaustion remains an open question. What cannot be disputed is that he found her body exactly where an impossible hitchhiker told him to look. That physical evidence of her presence remained in his vehicle for days, and that his dashboard camera recorded him interacting with someone who was not there. The loneliest road in America keeps its secrets, and some mysteries are never meant to be solved. Lucy had performed thousands of routine traffic stops during her 8 years with the Tennessee Highway Patrol, and she prided herself on her ability to read people. She could spot a nervous driver hiding drugs in the glove compartment, identify a vehicle that had been involved in criminal activity, and detect the subtle signs that something was not quite right during what should have been a simple interaction. Her instincts had served her well throughout her career, earning her recognition from her superiors and respect from her fellow troopers. But nothing in her training or experience had prepared her for the traffic stop that would save a life and expose a horror that still haunts her years later. It was a Thursday afternoon in late September, and Interstate 40 was busy with the usual rush of commercial trucks and commuter traffic making their way through rural Tennessee. The weather was clear, temperature in the mid-70s, and visibility was excellent. Lucy had been on patrol since noon, conducting speed enforcement and watching for impaired drivers. At approximately 4:37 p.m., she noticed a silver Honda Accord in the center lane with a broken right taillight. It was a minor violation, the kind of thing that would result in a warning rather than a citation. But protocol required that she make the stop to inform the driver of the equipment failure. Lucy activated her lights and the Honda immediately began to pull over, which was the first indicator that this stop might not be routine. Most drivers took several seconds to notice the patrol car behind them, often continuing for a quarter mile or more before responding to the lights and siren. This driver had reacted instantly, almost as if he had been expecting to be pulled over. The vehicle came to a complete stop on the shoulder, and Lucy approached from the driver's side after running the license plate through her computer. The registration came back clean, belonging to a Christopher Hughes with an address in Memphis. As Lucy walked toward the driver's window, She began cataloging the details that her training had taught her to notice. The Honda was older, perhaps 15 years, with visible rust around the wheel wells and a dent in the rear bumper. Nothing unusual about that. But as she got closer, she noticed that the rear of the vehicle was sitting lower than the front, as if there was significant weight in the trunk. She also noticed at least a dozen air fresheners hanging from the rear-view mirror, an excessive number that immediately raised a red flag. In her experience, that many air fresheners usually meant someone was trying to mask an odor. The driver had his window down before Lucy reached the vehicle, and his hands were visible on the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 positions. He was a white male in his late 30s, with thinning brown hair and a several-day growth of beard. His eyes were bloodshot, and he was sweating despite the comfortable temperature. When Lucy asked for his license and registration, his hands were shaking so badly that he had difficulty removing the documents from his wallet. Christopher's behavior immediately elevated Lucy's alert level. She had dealt with nervous drivers before, people who became anxious during any interaction with law enforcement, even when they had done nothing wrong. But this was different. Christopher was not just nervous. He was terrified. His eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, not looking at Lucy but seeming to check the back seat and trunk area. He fumbled with his license, dropping it twice before finally handing it over. When Lucy asked him where he was traveling from and where he was headed, his story changed 3 times in the span of 30 seconds. First, he said he was driving home to Memphis from a business trip in Nashville. Then he corrected himself and said he had been visiting a friend in Knoxville. Finally, he claimed he was on his way to meet his sister in Jackson. Each version contradicted the previous one, and none of them made sense given his current location and direction of travel. Lucy asked him to step out of the vehicle, citing the need to verify his registration. Christopher's face went pale, and he asked if that was really necessary. When Lucy insisted, he complied, but his movements were jerky and his breathing had become rapid and shallow. While Christopher stood at the rear of his vehicle, Lucy casually walked around the Honda, conducting what appeared to be a routine visual inspection. The smell hit her before she got close to the trunk. It was a combination of artificial air freshener and something organic that was being masked underneath. She had smelled that combination before during drug interdiction training. Dealers often used excessive air fresheners to cover the smell of marijuana or methamphetamine. But there was something else mixed in with the chemical sweetness. Something that made her think of sweat and fear and human waste. Lucy was about to ask Christopher for permission to search the vehicle when she heard it. A faint but unmistakable thumping sound coming from the trunk. 3 deliberate thumps, then a pause, then 3 more. It was not the random noise of cargo shifting during transit. It was rhythmic, purposeful. Someone was in that trunk, and they were trying to communicate. Christopher must have seen the realization on Lucy's face because his entire demeanor changed in an instant. The nervous, fumbling man transformed into something cold and calculating. He took a step toward Lucy, and his right hand moved toward the front pocket of his jacket. Lucy's training took over. She drew her service weapon in one fluid motion, leveling it at Christopher's center mass while simultaneously keying her radio with her left hand to request immediate backup. She ordered Christopher to show his hands and get on the ground, her voice cutting through the noise of traffic with absolute authority. For a moment, Christopher seemed to be weighing his options. His hand was still inside his jacket pocket, and Lucy could see his jaw clenching as he calculated whether he could reach whatever he was going for before she could fire. The moment stretched out impossibly long. Traffic rushing past on the interstate, the sun beginning to lower in the western sky, 2 people locked in a confrontation that could end in violence in the space of a heartbeat. Then Christopher made his decision. Instead of complying with Lucy's commands, he turned and ran. He sprinted across the shoulder of the highway and vaulted over the guardrail, disappearing into the dense vegetation that lined the interstate. Lucy had to make a split-second decision. She could pursue him on foot, leaving the vehicle and whoever was in the trunk unattended, or she could secure the scene and ensure the safety of the potential victim. She chose the latter. She ran to her patrol car, grabbed her baton, and returned to the Honda. She shouted that she was a police officer and that she was going to open the trunk, then used the baton to break the driver's side window and pop the trunk release. The trunk lid lifted slowly, and what Lucy saw inside would be seared into her memory forever. A young woman lay curled in the fetal position, her wrists bound behind her back with zip ties and her ankles similarly restrained. A strip of duct tape covered her mouth, and her eyes were wide with terror and exhaustion. She was wearing a college sweatshirt and jeans, both filthy and torn. Her face was bruised, with one eye swollen nearly shut, and dried blood caked her hairline where she had apparently been struck on the head. When she saw Lucy's uniform, she began to sob, her entire body shaking with the release of whatever terrible fear she had been holding inside. Lucy immediately called for an ambulance and additional units, then carefully removed the duct tape from the girl's mouth and used her knife to cut the zip ties. The girl could barely speak, her throat raw from screaming or crying, or both. She managed to whisper that her name was Penelope, that she was 17 years old, and that she had been in that trunk for what felt like forever. Lucy wrapped her in a blanket from the patrol car and tried to keep her calm while they waited for the ambulance. She asked Penelope if she could tell her what had happened, but the girl simply shook her head and continued crying. Backup arrived within 7 minutes, which felt like an eternity. 2 additional patrol units and a sheriff's deputy converged on the location, and a coordinated search for Christopher began immediately. A K-9 unit was dispatched to track his scent from where he had entered the woods. The ambulance arrived moments later, and paramedics began treating Penelope for dehydration and shock. She was conscious but disoriented, and the paramedics determined that she needed to be transported to the hospital immediately. Before the ambulance departed, Lucy asked Penelope one critical question. How long had she been in the trunk? Penelope's answer made Lucy feel physically sick. 47 hours. The girl had been stuffed in that trunk for nearly 2 full days, unable to stretch her legs or use a bathroom, given minimal water and no food, breathing the exhaust fumes and suffocating heat. She had been abducted from a college campus parking lot in Arkansas 3 days earlier and had been transported across state lines in the trunk of that Honda, completely helpless and certain she was going to die. While the ambulance rushed Penelope to the nearest trauma center, Lucy and her fellow officers processed the Honda as a crime scene. What they found in that vehicle painted a picture of premeditated evil that went far beyond a single abduction. In the glove compartment, they discovered a handwritten list with names, physical descriptions, and locations. Penelope's name was on that list, along with 8 others. Some of the names had check marks next to them. In the back seat, hidden under a blanket, they found additional zip ties, duct tape, rope, and a package of plastic sheeting. In the front seat console, they found a folding knife with dried blood on the blade and a detailed, handwritten plan for what Christopher intended to do with Penelope once he reached his destination. The plan described a remote cabin in the Smoky Mountains where Christopher would take his victims. It described the soundproof room he had constructed in the basement. It described the tools he had assembled and the timeline he intended to follow. Reading those pages, Lucy understood with absolute clarity that if she had not made that traffic stop, if she had not heard that thumping from the trunk, Penelope would have disappeared into those mountains and never been seen alive again. The search for Christopher intensified as detectives began investigating the names on his list. 2 of them were identified as missing persons cases from the previous year. One was a 21-year-old college student who had vanished from a rest stop in Arkansas. The other was a 19-year-old waitress who had disappeared from a grocery store parking lot in Kentucky. Both cases had gone cold with no suspects and no leads. Investigators now had reason to believe that Christopher had been responsible for both abductions and potentially others. Christopher was apprehended 6 hours later, trying to hitchhike on a rural highway 30 miles from where he had fled. He was unarmed when he was arrested, but a search of the jacket he had been wearing revealed what he had been reaching for during his confrontation with Lucy. It was a Glock 9mm handgun with a round chambered and the safety off. If Lucy had hesitated for even a moment, if her training had not taken over, Christopher would have shot her and disappeared with Penelope still trapped in that trunk. Under interrogation, Christopher initially refused to speak, but eventually his attorney negotiated a deal. In exchange for revealing the locations of his other victims, he would avoid the death penalty. He led investigators to a shallow grave in the Smoky Mountains, where the body of the missing college student was recovered. He provided detailed information about the waitress, whose remains were found in a different location in eastern Kentucky. He confessed to abducting 4 women over a 3-year period, though he claimed that Penelope was the only one he had intended to keep alive for an extended period. The others had died within days of their abductions. Penelope spent 2 weeks in the hospital recovering from dehydration, malnutrition, and her physical injuries. The psychological trauma would take much longer to heal. She underwent months of therapy and eventually testified at Christopher's trial, describing in vivid detail the 47 hours she had spent in that trunk, listening to him stop for gas and food, hearing him make phone calls to friends and family as if nothing were wrong, wondering if each moment would be her last. Christopher was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on multiple counts of kidnapping, murder, and assault. At his sentencing, he showed no remorse and offered no explanation for his actions beyond saying that he had wanted to see how long he could keep someone alive in captivity. The judge called him a predator without conscience and expressed relief that he would never again have the opportunity to harm another human being. Lucy received a commendation for her actions during the traffic stop, and her quick thinking was credited with saving Penelope's life and solving multiple cold cases. But the recognition meant little to her compared to the weight of what she had almost missed. She thinks about that day constantly, about the broken taillight that gave her justification for the stop, about the excessive air fresheners that raised her suspicions, about the thumping from the trunk that she almost dismissed as cargo shifting. She thinks about the 2 women whose bodies were recovered from those mountains and wonders how many traffic stops other officers had made on Christopher's vehicle during his 3-year spree. How many times he had been pulled over for minor violations and allowed to continue on his way, with a victim dying in his trunk. The Honda was eventually destroyed, but Lucy kept a photograph of it in her locker. She looks at it before every shift as a reminder that routine traffic stops are never truly routine. That evil often hides behind nervous smiles and broken tail lights, and that the difference between life and death can come down to an officer who trusts her instincts and refuses to ignore the warning signs. Penelope is alive today because Lucy heard the thumping and understood what it meant. 2 families were able to bury their daughters and find some measure of closure because Lucy made that stop and refused to let Christopher drive away. But Lucy still wakes up in the middle of the night sometimes, hearing that rhythmic thumping in her dreams and wondering how many other trunks are out there on America's highways, carrying victims who will never be found in time. Sergeant Stella had been part of the Tactical Support Division for the Tennessee Highway Patrol for 9 years. And during that time, she had participated in dozens of high-risk operations. Drug raids, fugitive apprehensions, weapons seizures, and human trafficking investigations had all been part of her regular duties. She had seen the worst of what people could do to one another, had witnessed scenes of violence and degradation that would haunt most civilians for the rest of their lives. But nothing in her extensive experience could have prepared her for what waited inside the converted rest stop that sat abandoned along Interstate 24, or for the betrayal that would shake her faith in law enforcement to its core. The investigation had begun 3 months earlier with an anonymous tip called into the FBI's human trafficking hotline. The caller, whose voice was disguised and whose number was untraceable, provided specific information about suspicious activity at a property that had once been a highway rest stop, but had been sold to private owners years earlier. The caller described vehicles arriving at odd hours, always with covered windows or enclosed cargo areas. The caller mentioned seeing women and girls being moved from vehicles into the building and hearing screaming coming from inside the structure at night. The caller claimed that some of the vehicles involved had been modified to look like law enforcement patrol cars. The FBI took the tip seriously enough to begin surveillance of the location. What they observed over the following weeks confirmed many of the caller's claims. Thermal imaging showed approximately 17 people inside the building during nighttime hours, with unusual movement patterns that suggested some of the occupants were confined to specific areas. License plate readers captured data on vehicles entering and leaving the property. And when those plates were run through national databases, several came back connected to missing persons cases from multiple states. 3 of the vehicles that made regular visits to the location were registered to individuals with prior convictions for human trafficking and sexual assault. The decision was made to execute a coordinated raid on the property. The operation would involve the FBI, the Tennessee Highway Patrol Tactical Team, the DEA due to suspected drug involvement, and the local county sheriff's department. Stella was assigned to the entry team, one of 12 officers who would be responsible for breaching the building and securing any suspects inside. The planning phase took 2 weeks, with detailed reconnaissance of the property, acquisition of the necessary warrants, and coordination between the multiple agencies involved. The raid was scheduled for pre-dawn on a Tuesday morning, calculated to catch the occupants at their most vulnerable and minimize the risk of armed resistance. The tactical teams assembled at a staging area 5 miles from the target, location at 4:30 a.m. Stella checked her equipment methodically as she had done before every operation. Body armor, helmet, flashbang grenades, zip tie restraints, medical kit, and her service weapon loaded with a full magazine and one in the chamber. The briefing was thorough. They expected to encounter armed suspects. They knew there were potential victims inside who would need immediate medical attention. They were prepared for a drug manufacturing operation or a trafficking way station where victims were held temporarily before being moved to other locations. What they were not prepared for was the scale of what they would find. The convoy of law enforcement vehicles moved into position at 5:47 a.m., surrounding the property and cutting off all possible escape routes. The entry teams approached from multiple angles, moving quickly and silently through the pre-dawn darkness. On the signal, they breached 3 separate entry points simultaneously, using battering rams to force open doors that had been reinforced with additional locks and security bars. Stella entered through the main entrance with her team, moving room by room with weapons raised and calling out commands to any occupants. The first horror revealed itself in what had once been the public restroom area of the rest stop. The space had been converted into a series of makeshift cells, with walls constructed from plywood and 2x4s dividing the area into cramped compartments, barely large enough for a person to lie down. Each cell was secured with a padlock on the outside, and several still contained occupants. Women and girls ranging in age from 14 to 32 were found inside these cells, some lying on bare mattresses, others huddled in corners. Their physical conditions varied, but all showed signs of prolonged captivity. Malnutrition, bruising, untreated injuries, and the hollow-eyed stare of severe psychological trauma. Stella's team immediately shifted from tactical mode to rescue operations, calling for medical assistance and carefully extracting the victims from the cells. The women were terrified, some screaming when they saw the armed officers, others completely catatonic and unresponsive. Stella removed her helmet and body armor to appear less threatening as she helped guide a young girl, who could not have been more than 15 years old, out of one of the cells. The girl was wearing clothes that were far too large for her thin frame, and her wrists showed the marks of restraints that had been recently removed. As medical personnel began arriving to treat the victims, other members of the tactical team continued clearing the building. In what had been the main lobby area of the rest stop, they discovered an office that contained the operational heart of the trafficking operation. File cabinets filled with detailed ledgers showing transactions, photographs of victims at various stages of captivity, and computer equipment storing databases with information on buyers and sellers across a network that spanned 6 states. The level of organization was sophisticated, indicating that this was not a small-time operation, but rather a node in a much larger criminal enterprise. The man who appeared to be the leader of the operation, a 47-year-old named Christian, was found attempting to destroy hard drives when the tactical team entered the office. He was taken into custody, claiming that the property was a religious sanctuary and that law enforcement had no jurisdiction over his activities. His protests were ignored as he was placed in restraints and removed from the building. 14 other suspects were apprehended throughout the property, some attempting to flee through back exits, others trying to hide in crawl spaces and storage areas. But the true horror of the compound revealed itself when investigators discovered the underground expansion. Beneath the main building, accessible through a concealed entrance in what had been the maintenance room, was a series of rooms that had been excavated and constructed without any permits or official knowledge. These underground chambers showed evidence of torture, with restraint devices bolted to walls, bloodstains on concrete floors, and implements designed to cause pain and control through fear. The psychological impact of seeing these rooms affected even the most experienced officers on the scene, and several had to step outside to compose themselves before continuing with the investigation. As the victims were transported to hospitals and crisis centers, they began providing testimony about their ordeals. The stories they told painted a picture of systematic predation that had been operating for years. Women traveling alone on the interstate had been targeted by individuals wearing authentic highway patrol uniforms and driving vehicles that appeared identical to official patrol cars. These fake officers would initiate traffic stops for minor violations, then use their apparent authority to gain compliance before abducting their victims. Other victims had been taken from rest stops, gas stations, and truck stops along major highways, approached by men claiming to be law enforcement officers investigating criminal activity. The investigation into how the trafficking ring had obtained authentic uniforms and equipment led to a discovery that devastated the law enforcement community. 3 of the 14 suspects arrested at the compound were genuine highway patrol officers. They had used their positions and authority to facilitate abductions, provided information about patrol schedules and checkpoint locations to help the operation avoid detection, and had actively participated in the trafficking activities. The revelation that officers sworn to protect and serve had instead been predators using their badges to hunt victims sent shockwaves through every department involved in the case. The scope of the operation became clearer as forensic analysts worked through the seized computers and documents. The trafficking ring had been operating for at least 6 years, had connections to similar operations in 11 other states, and had moved an estimated 200 victims through their network during that time. Some victims had been sold to buyers overseas. Others had been kept in domestic situations of forced labor or sexual slavery. A significant number had simply disappeared, their ultimate fates unknown and likely never to be determined. The trial of the compound's suspects took 8 months to complete. The evidence was overwhelming, with testimony from victims, physical evidence from the compound, and digital records documenting years of criminal activity. 7 of the defendants received life sentences without the possibility of parole. The 3 highway patrol officers who had been part of the operation received enhanced sentences due to their abuse of authority and betrayal of public trust. Their cases received extensive media coverage, leading to nationwide reforms in how law enforcement agencies conduct background checks and monitor officer behavior for warning signs of corruption. For the 8 women and girls rescued from the compound, the road to recovery would be long and difficult. They were placed in witness protection programs due to concerns about retaliation from other members of the trafficking network who remained at large. They received extensive medical treatment and psychological counseling. But the trauma of what they had endured would stay with them for the rest of their lives. 2 of the youngest victims could not remember their real names or where they had come from, having been held in captivity for so long that their previous lives had been erased from their memories. Stella required 2 years of therapy before she felt capable of returning to full duty. The images of those cells, the condition of the victims, and especially the knowledge that fellow officers had been responsible, haunted her dreams and made it difficult for her to trust her colleagues. She transferred to a different division, unable to continue working alongside officers she had known for years, without wondering if they too might be capable of such betrayal. The raid on the compound had saved 8 lives and dismantled a major trafficking operation. But it had also revealed that evil can wear a badge and use the authority of law enforcement to prey upon the vulnerable. That knowledge, once learned, could never be forgotten. Trooper Landon had heard the stories from the older officers about the fog walker since his first week with the West Virginia Highway Patrol, and he had dismissed them entirely as the kind of hazing ritual that new recruits were subjected to in every department. The veterans would gather in the break room during shift changes and speak in hushed tones about the thing that appeared in the fog along Route 12 through the Appalachian Mountains. How it caused accidents. How drivers were found catatonic behind the wheel with no memory of what had happened to them. They described a figure of impossible height with movements that were not quite human. Something that should not exist but had been seen by dozens of officers over the decades. Landon had laughed along with the other rookies, assuming it was nothing more than urban legend designed to unsettle newcomers who would be patrolling those isolated mountain roads alone at night. His first encounter with the fog walker came 11 months into his career. On a November night when a dense fog advisory had been issued for the entire mountain region. Visibility on Route 12 had dropped to less than 50 feet, and the highway patrol had been advising motorists to avoid the area if possible, or to reduce speed significantly if travel was necessary. Landon had been assigned to patrol the stretch of highway between mile markers 87 and 115, a 28-mile section of winding mountain road that was treacherous even in good weather. The fog transformed it into something far more dangerous. a gray void where the road seemed to disappear just beyond the reach of the headlights. At approximately 2:17 a.m., Landon's headlights caught movement in the fog ahead of him. He slowed his patrol car to a crawl, assuming it was a deer or perhaps a motorist who had broken down and was walking along the shoulder. As he drew closer, the shape resolved into the figure of what appeared to be a person standing directly in the center of the northbound lane. Landon activated his spotlight and emergency lights, illuminating the figure as best he could through the thick fog. What he saw made absolutely no sense. The figure was impossibly tall, at least 7 or 8 feet in height, with proportions that were subtly wrong in ways that Landon's brain struggled to process. The limbs were too long relative to the torso. The head sat at an angle that suggested the neck was either broken or constructed differently than human anatomy should allow. The figure was dressed in what might have been dark clothing, though the fog made it difficult to determine specific details. It stood perfectly motionless in the road, not reacting to the lights or the approach of the patrol car. Landon brought his vehicle to a complete stop approximately 30 feet from the figure and activated his public address system, calling out for the person to move to the shoulder of the road. There was no response. The figure remained motionless, and the fog swirled around it in patterns that seemed to avoid direct contact with its form. Landon called in his location and the situation to dispatch, then exited his patrol car with his flashlight in hand. He took 3 steps toward the figure, and in the time it took him to blink, it was gone. Simply vanished. No movement, no sound, just empty fog where something had been standing moments before. Landon searched the immediate area with his flashlight, checking both shoulders of the road and looking for any indication of where the figure might have gone. The fog was so thick that visibility extended only a few feet in any direction. But there was nowhere for something that large to hide on the open highway. More disturbing was the complete absence of footprints on the damp pavement. The fog had created a thin layer of condensation on the road's surface that should have shown tracks if anyone had been walking there. But the asphalt was unmarked. Before Landon could return to his patrol car, dispatch called with a report of an accident approximately 2 miles ahead near mile marker 91. A single vehicle collision with the driver, reported as unresponsive. Landon responded immediately, navigating the fog-shrouded curves at reduced speed until he reached the accident scene. A sedan had drifted off the road and collided with a guardrail at low speed, causing minimal damage to the vehicle, but leaving the driver in a disturbing condition. The driver was a man in his early 40s, physically unharmed according to preliminary assessment, but completely catatonic. His eyes were open and dilated, staring straight ahead through the windshield at nothing. He did not respond to verbal commands, did not react to light shown in his eyes, and showed no awareness of Landon's presence. His hands were still gripping the steering wheel with such force that his knuckles were white and his fingers had to be pried loose. An ambulance transported him to the nearest hospital, where medical examination found no physical injuries, no drugs or alcohol in his system, and no neurological explanation for his condition. Landon filed his report about both incidents, carefully documenting the strange figure in the road and its impossible disappearance. He expected his supervisor to question the account or suggest that the fog had played tricks on his perception. Instead, his supervisor pulled a thick file from a locked cabinet and placed it on the desk between them. The file contained reports dating back 43 years, all describing similar encounters on Route 12 during fog events. 17 separate incidents where drivers had been found in catatonic states after accidents. 22 reports from highway patrol officers describing a tall figure that appeared in fog and vanished without explanation. 4 cases where passengers in vehicles described seeing the figure approach before the driver froze and the vehicle went out of control. The pattern was undeniable. Every incident occurred during dense fog conditions. Every sighting described the same impossible height and wrong proportions. Every affected driver showed the same symptoms of extreme psychological trauma with no physical cause. The local historical society had records of similar incidents going back even further, with accounts from the 1940s describing motorists who claimed to have seen something in the fog that should not exist. Something that watched them from the roadside with eyes that reflected light like an animal. One particularly detailed account from 1967 came from a state trooper who had been patrolling Route 12 during a fog event and had watched the figure approach his stopped patrol car. He described the face pressing against the driver's side window, features that were almost human, but with too many teeth visible in what might have been a smile, or might have been something else entirely. The trooper had frozen, unable to move or call for help, while the figure remained at the window for what felt like hours, but was later determined to have been approximately 3 minutes based on radio timestamps. When the fog finally lifted enough for other units to reach his location, they found him unresponsive behind the wheel, and he never returned to active duty. Landon's second encounter with the fog walker occurred 7 months later during another heavy fog event on Route 12. This time he was responding to a disabled vehicle near mile marker 94, where a motorist had called for assistance with a flat tire. As Landon approached the location, his headlights caught the same impossible figure standing on the shoulder of the road, this time much closer to his vehicle. He could see more details through the fog. The way the figure's movements were jerky and unnatural when it turned to face the patrol car. The way its head tilted at an angle that should have been anatomically impossible. The way it began walking toward the patrol car with a gait that suggested joints bending in wrong directions. Landon's training and instinct warred with a primal terror that he had never experienced before. He knew he should exit the vehicle and investigate. He knew he should call in the sighting and wait for backup. But his body refused to obey his commands. His hands gripped the steering wheel exactly as he had found the catatonic driver gripping his steering wheel months earlier. He watched in horror as the figure approached, growing larger as it moved through the fog, with movements that hurt to watch. When it reached the passenger side of the patrol car, it pressed what might have been a face against the window. Landon could see teeth, far too many teeth arranged in rows that extended back into a throat that seemed to contain darkness deeper than the fog outside. He could see eyes that reflected the interior lights of the patrol car with a greenish glow that no human eyes should produce. He could see the condensation from its breath fogging the window, though logically he knew that whatever this thing was, it should not breathe in any way he understood. The moment stretched impossibly long, and then the figure pulled back from the window and vanished into the fog. When backup arrived 15 minutes later, they found Landon sitting in his patrol car, conscious but unable to speak coherently. The disabled vehicle he had been responding to was nowhere to be found, and no record of a call for assistance could be located in the dispatch logs. Landon was transported to the hospital where he was evaluated and released with no physical injuries. He requested a transfer to a different patrol region the following day, and his request was approved without question. In the 8 years since that encounter, Landon has never returned to Route 12. He has spoken with 4 other officers who have had similar experiences, and all of them have transferred or retired rather than continue patrolling that stretch of highway. The incidents continue at a rate of approximately 2 per year, always during fog conditions, always with the same impossible figure and the same traumatized witnesses. No satisfactory explanation has ever been determined. No clear photographs have ever been obtained despite dashboard cameras in modern patrol vehicles. The figure appears and disappears according to patterns that no one has been able to predict or prevent. And drivers continue to report seeing something in the fog along Route 12 that should not exist, something that has been there for decades and shows no sign of stopping. Officer Audrey had been with the Colorado Highway Patrol for 4 years when she made the traffic stop that would become the most disturbing case of her career. She had developed a reputation among her colleagues for having excellent instincts, an ability to sense when something was wrong even when everything appeared normal on the surface. Her training officers had noted this quality early on, and it had served her well in identifying impaired drivers, locating concealed weapons, and detecting deception during routine interactions. But nothing in her experience had prepared her for what she would find in the blue minivan, with expired registration, that she pulled over on a sunny Wednesday afternoon in June. The van came to her attention during a routine license plate scan while she was conducting speed enforcement on Interstate 70 near the mountain town of Silverthorne. The automated system flagged the vehicle for registration that had expired 3 months earlier, a minor violation that typically resulted in a warning or small fine. Audrey activated her lights, and the van pulled over immediately onto the shoulder, complying with all standard procedures. Nothing about the stop seemed unusual as she approached the vehicle. It was a typical family minivan, perhaps 10 years old but well maintained, with no visible damage or suspicious modifications. As Audrey walked toward the driver's side window, she conducted her standard visual assessment of the vehicle and its occupants. The driver was a woman in her late 40s or early 50s named Leah, with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail and wearing casual clothing. In the back seat were 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, who appeared to range in age from approximately 4 to 9 years old. They were all buckled into their seats properly, and there were no obvious safety violations. But as Audrey drew closer to the window, she noticed something that triggered her instincts in a way she could not immediately explain. The children were completely silent. Not the normal quiet of well-behaved kids during a traffic stop, but an unnatural stillness that seemed wrong. They sat in their seats without moving, without looking around, without even appearing to breathe. Their eyes were open but unfocused, staring straight ahead at the back of the front seats. Audrey had encountered thousands of children during traffic stops over the years, and she had never seen kids this motionless. Even the most disciplined children fidgeted, looked around, showed some sign of awareness of what was happening. These children were like mannequins. The driver rolled down her window before Audrey reached it, smiling too widely and speaking too quickly. She apologized profusely for the expired registration, explaining that she had been meaning to renew it, but had been busy with the children and their activities. Her explanation was overly detailed for such a minor violation, providing information that Audrey had not asked for about where they had been and where they were going. Audrey's instincts, already on alert because of the children's strange behavior, became more insistent that something was very wrong with this situation. There was also a smell, faint but distinct, a chemical odor that reminded Audrey of hospital antiseptics mixed with something else she could not immediately identify. When she asked the driver about it, Leah's smile became even wider and more forced as she claimed she had spilled some cleaning supplies earlier that day. The explanation was plausible, but the way it was delivered felt rehearsed, as if Leah had been prepared for that specific question. Audrey asked for the driver's license and vehicle registration, standard procedure for any traffic stop. While Leah fumbled in the glove compartment for the documents, Audrey took the opportunity to look more carefully at the children. The boy in the middle seat had visible dark circles under his eyes, and his skin had an unhealthy pale quality that suggested either illness or severe sleep deprivation. The younger girl's clothing was dirty, and appeared to be several sizes too large for her thin frame. The older girl had what looked like bruising around her wrists that could have been caused by restraints. When Audrey asked the children their names, Leah answered for them before any of the children could respond. She provided names quickly and confidently. But the children showed no reaction to hearing what were supposedly their own names. No acknowledgement, no eye contact, nothing. Audrey asked the children directly if they were okay. And again Leah intercepted, claiming they were tired from a long day of activities and just wanted to get home. The children remained completely silent and motionless. Audrey's training and instincts were screaming at her that this was not a normal traffic stop. She requested backup using a code that would alert other units to respond without the driver knowing she had called for assistance. She kept her demeanor calm and professional, not wanting to escalate the situation before help arrived, but she positioned herself in a way that would allow her to react quickly if Leah attempted to flee or became aggressive. The license check came back valid for Leah with an address in Denver, approximately 70 miles from their current location. But when Audrey asked where they were headed, Leah claimed they were going home to Grand Junction, which was in the opposite direction. When this inconsistency was pointed out, Leah became visibly agitated for the first time, her smile faltering as she corrected herself and claimed she had misspoken because she was tired. She then stated they were visiting relatives in Vail, but that also did not match their current location or direction of travel. The backup unit arrived within 8 minutes, and Audrey's partner approached the passenger side of the van while Audrey maintained her position at the driver's window. With another officer present, Audrey felt more confident in pushing the situation further. She asked Leah to step out of the vehicle so they could discuss the registration issue and verify her insurance information. Leah's demeanor changed immediately. The forced smile disappeared, replaced by visible anxiety and resistance. She claimed there was no need for her to exit the vehicle, that she could provide whatever information was needed from the driver's seat. Audrey insisted, and when Leah continued to resist, Audrey made the decision to physically remove her from the vehicle for officer safety. As Leah was being escorted to the patrol car, she became increasingly agitated, claiming that the children needed to get home, that they had medication schedules to keep, that this was unnecessary harassment. Her protests were loud enough to be heard clearly, but the children in the van still did not react. They remained motionless in their seats, staring straight ahead. With Leah secured in the patrol car, Audrey's partner opened the sliding door of the van to check on the children's welfare. What they discovered confirmed Audrey's worst suspicions. The children were heavily sedated, their pupils constricted, and their responses to stimuli minimal. Empty prescription medication bottles were found under the front seats, along with zip-tie restraints that had been cut off but not disposed of. Beneath the removable floor mats in the cargo area were additional restraints, rolls of duct tape, and a large plastic storage container that appeared to have been recently cleaned but still showed residue that would later be identified as human waste. Medical personnel were called immediately, and the children were transported to the nearest hospital for evaluation and treatment. The initial medical assessment revealed that all 3 children had been subjected to prolonged sedation using prescription medications, likely for several days or longer. They were dehydrated, malnourished, and showed physical signs of restraint injuries on their wrists and ankles. The youngest child also had injuries consistent with being confined in a small space for extended periods. The investigation that followed revealed a nightmare that had been unfolding over 18 months. The children had been abducted from 3 different states in separate incidents. None of them were related to Leah or to each other. Leah had been moving between states in the minivan, keeping the children sedated and restrained. living out a delusion that she was rescuing them from bad families and taking them to a better life. She had developed an elaborate system for managing the children, including detailed schedules for medication dosing, feeding, and bathroom breaks that minimized the time they spent conscious and able to resist. The forensic examination of the van and Leah's belongings uncovered journals filled with detailed observations of families she had been surveilling. She had spent months watching playgrounds, schools, and public spaces, selecting children who she believed were being neglected or mistreated by their parents. Her selection criteria were based entirely on her delusional interpretations of normal parent-child interactions. A parent checking their phone while a child played was evidence of neglect in Leah's mind. A parent telling a child to hurry up or be quiet was evidence of abuse. She had convinced herself that she was performing a noble service by kidnapping these children. Further investigation revealed that the 3 children in the van were not Leah's only victims. Evidence in her journals referenced 4 other children who had previously been in her custody. Expanded searches of areas where Leah had traveled led to the heartbreaking discovery of 2 children's bodies, victims who had not survived the heavy sedation and confinement. 2 other children referenced in the journals were never found, and it remains unknown whether they are still alive somewhere or if their bodies simply have not been discovered. The psychological evaluation of Leah revealed severe delusional disorder with paranoid features. She genuinely believed she was protecting the children, that she was the only person who truly cared about their welfare, and that the families from whom she had taken them were monsters who deserved to lose their children. Even when confronted with evidence of the harm she had caused, including the deaths of 2 children, she remained convinced that her actions had been justified and necessary. The 3 children rescued from the van faced long and difficult recoveries. The prolonged exposure to sedative medications had caused developmental delays and potential long-term neurological effects. The psychological trauma of their experiences would require years of therapy. Most heartbreaking was the fact that 2 of the 3 children had been in Leah's custody long enough that they initially did not recognize their biological parents when reunited with them. The extended sedation and isolation had effectively erased their memories of their previous lives, requiring a difficult process of rebuilding relationships with families they no longer remembered. For Audrey, the case became a defining moment in her career. She thought constantly about the timing, about the automated license plate reader that had flagged that particular van on that particular day. If Leah had renewed her registration, if Audrey had been assigned to a different patrol route, if she had dismissed her instincts about the motionless children, those 3 kids would have remained in Leah's custody. They might have ended up like the 2 children whose bodies had been found, or like the 2 who were never found at all. Audrey became a vocal advocate for improved training in recognizing human trafficking and child abduction situations. She developed training materials based on her experience, emphasizing the importance of trusting officer instincts when something feels wrong, even if specific violations cannot be immediately identified. She also worked with child advocacy groups to improve systems for tracking missing children and coordinating information between jurisdictions. The blue minivan was eventually destroyed after all forensic evidence had been collected, but Audrey keeps a photograph of it in her locker. Before every shift, she looks at that photograph and reminds herself why the job matters, why every traffic stop deserves full attention and proper procedure, and why trusting her instincts can mean the difference between life and death for the vulnerable people she is sworn to protect. The dispatch operator monitoring the overnight shift had been routing calls for the New Mexico Highway Patrol for 12 years, and she prided herself on maintaining composure during even the most stressful situations. She had guided officers through high-speed pursuits, coordinated responses to multi-vehicle accidents, and kept calm while listening to officers call for backup during violent confrontations. Her voice on the radio was always steady, professional, and reassuring. But the final transmission from Officer Christian on that February night would shatter her professional detachment and haunt her for the rest of her life. Christian had been with the Highway Patrol for 6 years and was known among his colleagues as reliable and level-headed. He worked solo patrol on the night shift, covering a remote section of Highway 84 that stretched through the New Mexico desert between the towns of Las Vegas and Santa Rosa. It was lonely work, with hours passing between vehicles on some nights, but Christian had never complained. He followed protocol meticulously, checking in with dispatch every 30 minutes as required and responding promptly to any calls in his area. His last routine check-in came at 11:47 p.m. His transmission was clear and professional, reporting all quiet at mile marker 247. The dispatcher acknowledged and noted the time in her log. Nothing about the transmission suggested anything unusual. Christian sounded calm, alert, and in complete control. 30 minutes later, when he failed to make his scheduled check-in at 12:17 a.m., the dispatcher attempted to reach him on the radio. There was no response. She tried again, using both his unit number and his name, but received only static. At 12:19 a.m., Christian's voice suddenly came through the radio. The transmission was distorted, breaking up with interference that should not have occurred given the quality of the patrol vehicle's communication equipment. Through the static, the dispatcher heard Christian say, "There are too many of them." The statement made no sense. Christian was in a remote desert area where dispatch had not sent him to any calls. There should not have been anyone there at all, let alone too many of anyone. The dispatcher immediately requested clarification, asking Christian to repeat his transmission and specify what he was referring to. His response came through more clearly this time, and the words sent a chill through the dispatch center. "They should not be here. This is wrong." His voice had changed. The calm professionalism was gone, replaced by something that sounded like confusion mixed with awe. He was not panicking, but there was definitely something wrong in his tone. The dispatcher asked for his exact location and status, trying to determine if he needed backup. She could hear sounds in the background of the transmission that she could not identify. The vehicle door opening, footsteps on gravel, and Christian's breathing becoming heavier as if he was exerting himself. Then his voice came through again, and this time there was an unmistakable note of wonder in his words. "Tell my wife I saw something beautiful and terrible. They are taking me to..." The transmission cut off abruptly mid-sentence. The dispatcher immediately activated the emergency protocol, broadcasting an officer in distress call and directing all available units to Christian's last known location at mile marker 247. She continued attempting to raise Christian on the radio while simultaneously coordinating the response. The nearest backup unit was 43 minutes away due to the remote location. A state police helicopter was dispatched, but would take over an hour to reach the area. The dispatcher kept trying Christian's radio every 30 seconds, hoping for a response that never came. The first unit arrived on scene at 12:59 a.m., 52 minutes after Christian's final transmission. What they found defied explanation. Christian's patrol car was parked on the shoulder of the highway, exactly at mile marker 247. Engine still running, lights still on, driver's door standing wide open. There was no sign of Christian, no sign of any other vehicles, no indication of what had caused him to exit his patrol car or where he had gone. The responding officer immediately called for additional units and began searching the immediate area. Christian's service weapon was still in its holster inside the vehicle, mounted on the seat where he would have secured it while driving. His portable radio was still in its charging dock on the dashboard. His phone, wallet, and all his personal effects were inside the vehicle. His jacket was draped over the passenger seat, and the interior heater was running at full blast. It appeared as if Christian had simply stepped out of the vehicle intending to return momentarily, except he had vanished completely. The responding officer walked around the patrol car looking for any clues about what had happened. He found footprints leading away from the driver's side door across the gravel shoulder toward the desert. The prints were clearly from Christian's duty boots, and they showed a normal walking stride, not running or struggling. But 30 feet from the vehicle, the footprints simply stopped. There was no disturbance in the soil to suggest Christian had been picked up or carried. The prints did not veer off in a different direction or become obscured by rocky terrain. They simply ended in the middle of open ground with no explanation. As additional units arrived, a systematic search was organized. K9 teams were brought in to track Christian's scent. The dogs followed the same trail of footprints to the point where they ended, then became confused and agitated, circling the area, but unable to pick up any continuing trail. A helicopter equipped with thermal imaging flew grid patterns over a 10-square-mile area surrounding mile marker 247, searching for any heat signature that might indicate a person on foot in the desert. They found nothing. The temperature that night had dropped to 28 degrees, cold enough that Christian would not survive for long without his jacket and cold weather gear, all of which had been left in his patrol car. The investigation expanded over the following days. Forensic technicians processed the patrol car for any evidence of foul play. They found no signs of struggle, no blood, no foreign fingerprints, no indication that anyone other than Christian had been in the vehicle recently. The communication system was examined to determine if the distorted transmission could provide any clues. Audio analysis revealed something disturbing. In the background of Christian's final transmission, beneath his voice and the sounds of him exiting the vehicle, there was a high-pitched frequency that had not been audible during the live transmission, but showed up clearly on the recording. The frequency was outside the normal range of human hearing and had no identifiable source. The investigation into Christian's disappearance eventually revealed a disturbing pattern. Research through Highway Patrol archives identified 3 other cases of officers vanishing from the same stretch of Highway 84 over the past 30 years. In each instance, the missing officer had been working solo night patrol and had made radio transmissions indicating confusion or distress before disappearing without explanation. In 2 of the 3 previous cases, the officer's patrol car had been found in the same condition as Christian's, running and abandoned with no signs of violence or struggle. Local Native American tribes in the area had oral traditions about mile marker 247, which they referred to as the doorway place. According to these traditions, there were certain locations where the boundary between worlds became thin, where things from elsewhere could cross over and where people could be taken away. The tribal elders were not surprised when told about Christian's disappearance and said that the area around mile marker 247 had been avoided by their people for generations. A long-haul truck driver came forward 3 days after Christian's disappearance, with information that had initially seemed too bizarre to report. He stated that he had been driving southbound on Highway 84 at approximately 12:15 a.m. on the night Christian vanished. As he passed mile marker 247, he saw multiple bright lights in the sky above the area, lights that were moving in patterns inconsistent with aircraft. He had dismissed it as military activity from a nearby base, but after learning about the missing officer, he felt compelled to report what he had seen. Christian was officially declared dead 7 years after his disappearance. As required by law, when someone goes missing without evidence of death. His wife never remarried and spent years campaigning for answers about what happened to her husband. She formed a support group for families of missing law enforcement officers and pushed for improved safety protocols for solo patrol assignments in remote areas. Other officers who patrol Highway 84 report experiencing equipment malfunctions at mile marker 247. Radios suddenly fill with static. GPS systems lose signal. Dashboard cameras shut off without explanation. Many officers refuse to patrol that section alone at night, requesting backup even for routine stops in the area. The official policy is that there is nothing unusual about mile marker 247. But unofficial policy among the officers themselves is very different. The dashboard camera footage from Christian's patrol car was recovered and analyzed frame by frame. It showed Christian exiting the vehicle at 12:18 a.m. and walking toward the desert. In the final frames before the camera angle no longer captured him, he can be seen looking up at the sky with an expression that investigators could not quite interpret. Some described it as fear. Others said it looked more like wonder. In the very last frame, Christian's shadow is visible on the ground. But in the next frame, recorded 2 seconds later, the shadow is gone, though Christian himself is still partially visible in the shot. His shadow disappeared before he did. The case remains open in the files of the New Mexico Highway Patrol. Christian's badge number has not been reassigned. His locker at the station has been left untouched, his belongings still inside exactly as he left them on his last shift. Once a year, on the anniversary of his disappearance, officers gather at mile marker 247 to remember their missing colleague and to wonder what happened to him in those final moments. The questions that haunted the dispatcher who heard his last transmission remain unanswered. What did Christian see? Where did he go? And what did he mean when he said they were taking him somewhere? The desert keeps its secrets, and mile marker 247 remains a place where the impossible has happened more than once, and where it might happen again.